I wasn't 100% sure I was going to make it through this read. There were times I was questioning my decision to actually pick it up and even try, as you are about to see. Hi guys, it's April, and I'm going to do this review the same way I do all of my other reviews. I'm going to have the non-spoilery section up front, followed by the spoiled fill dump afterwards, because it's a doozy this time around. I will have it noted that I received an art copy of this book for a free and honest review, and I in no means am swayed by that, as this review is about to tell. So Under the Willows by Pamela McCord is the story of a young mother, Kelly, who's dealing with the loss of her husband, Tom, and starting a new life with her son, TJ. She decides to move them out to a house that her late husband inherited, and once they start living in this house, some strange things start to happen centered around their Alexa Dot. So this book very much had a murder mystery vibe to it, with a touch of supernatural. The whole premise is you get to see Kelly dealing with the grief and loss of her husband and a possible new love interest, all at the same time. Her and her son TJ are trying to figure out what is going on with this Alexa Dot. This Alexa Dot very much takes center stage in this story. I love supernatural stories. That is why I was very drawn to this at the beginning. I love everything that has that paranormal aspect to it, that there's a possible haunting going on, but I think this book failed a little bit in developing what was a interesting storyline and interesting character set. It struggled a lot to build this atmosphere that I'm used to in these kind of suspense paranormal stories. A lot of time there was just a lot of filler. I can't tell you the number of times that the series of events that happened to Kelly in this story we watched happen, but then she would sit and explain those same series of events to different characters, and it felt very much unnecessary. And at the same time didn't seem to have a real weighty feel to it. Things seem to move very, very quickly, especially for the fact that this is a recent widow who is dealing with raising her son on her own for the very first time, and yet suddenly we have this love interest that starts to take center stage. And the loss of her husband, of Tom, doesn't seem as big of a deal anymore, even though it is directly after those events that they move into this house. And TJ himself doesn't seem to feel a lot of that loss for his father, and readily accepts a bunch of new characters into his life without really having any repercussions or emotional stress because of it. So you wrap all of that up into a ball, and it starts to feel like this story was longer than it should have been. You get where the author is trying to go with this whole story, the series of events that are the actual exciting parts of this, and then it gets dragged on longer than necessary. I don't need to know all of the minute details, and the way some of these things were described felt very underdeveloped for me. Almost like this was the first pass and it could have used further refinement. And it started to feel like ghosts were a party trick, when the whole main point of this story was that these ghosts actually had an integral part on everything that was going on. But they became this novelty, they became this trick that was being shown off to various different characters, trying to get all of this explained. And because of that, the paranormal aspect started to lose some of its seriousness. You got the whole aspect of this story where it started to hint at the fact that maybe these were real events and they were trying to pass them off as fiction because no one would actually believe this. It's actually something several of the characters said several times, and I know what kind of feel that the author was maybe trying to go for by making these comments, but it was made maybe one too many times, and because of the way the story was written, it didn't feel like it was Kelly recounting her story. I think if this book was written more by Kelly's hand, and then those kind of comments were passed off as, oh, I'd have to write this as fiction because no one would ever believe this, then maybe I'd get more of a feel for that. Maybe if there was, I don't know, a fake author's note at the beginning or at the end, or those little kind of tidbits, and the fact that Kelly, you don't get the sense that she's an author of any kind. In fact, I don't even know what Kelly does. She doesn't seem to have a job at all in all of this. Some of that just, it didn't sit right with me, and then there were other parts of the story that were added in that really didn't have a point to it. You have this whole secondary crisis or plot line going on that didn't really help the main plot. It felt like an afterthought or something that was thrown in there to try and throw you off, but it wasn't filled out enough to actually accomplish anything. I did enjoy the mystery aspect of this book, but I don't feel like it had enough support by the characters or by the descriptions or by anything that was going on to make it really feel moody. And that's the kind of read that I really enjoy when I'm going into darker stories like this. It ended up feeling too light because it was so underdeveloped. It wasn't a bad story by any means. I just feel like it could have been revised a little bit, pared down a little bit, and then beefed up in other areas to really give it some weight. So this is the point in which I'm going to start going into more details that are going to contain spoilers. So if you feel like reading this book, I recommend that you pause now and then come back after you finish and we can have a discussion about all the things I'm about to talk about. Or if you want to hear me ramble or just go off on things and don't really care, feel free to stick around. I started hinting at a lot of issues that I was having in this read, trying to keep it spoiler free, but it was really, really hard because the whole premise of the story is that the Alexa Dot starts talking to TJ. At first, Kelly doesn't believe him. It isn't until certain names are started to be mentioned by this Alexa Dot that the connection between some missing girls starts to happen. And that's where the story really starts to take off. And yes, we eventually find one of the girls. We were there when that girl was found, but then we had to sit and explain it to the police officers. Then we had to sit and explain it to friends. Then we had to sit and explain it to another set of parents from another girl that is also wrapped up into this whole storyline when the reader already knows this story. So there was probably better ways to portray that all of this had to happen. This book had so much pointless filler and it was dragged on to an extent that I didn't feel necessary. There was probably a better way to write the plot and get to where you wanted to go, finding the second girl's body without a whole bunch of this like in between that seemed to happen. And this in between happened, I think, mostly because the romance was supposed to be pulled along by it, but the romance didn't feel right. Kelly has just become a widow, and throughout the whole story, like every other page, she's constantly fighting with herself and whether or not she should accept Rob and his advances and her feelings that are starting to grow for him, which did get relatively annoying. But the fact that it feels too soon for me, and the fact that TJ doesn't seem to have any qualms about Rob suddenly being in their life and a almost permanent fixture within a couple of days, it's hard to wrap my brains around that. I think there would have been a little bit more trauma wrapped up into all of that, especially with the way that Tom, Kelly's husband, passed. He was killed by a drunk driver. That's a sudden loss. It's hard to imagine that there wouldn't be some repercussions with Kelly and with TJ, and it was all just kind of brushed under the rug relatively quickly. At the beginning, there was a couple of moments where, you know, I'm still crying about it, I'm still having feelings about it, please don't ask me about it, and then all of a sudden we jump into all of this other stuff, and all of that seems to be forgotten. And the fact that we kept on dragging people into TJ's room to talk to the Alexa Dot and to call up Emily just to prove to everybody else that Emily existed, that this Alexa Dot was housing a ghost. It started to feel like a parlor trick, like a party game, like a show and tell, and it didn't feel right. I can't imagine that the spirit of this girl would constantly like to come back when there were more and more and more people in the room. And the way that both Kelly and Rob start to explain their actions to other people and to the other parents, and it just became like, we probably shouldn't tell them, but hey, let's just throw it out on there and screw the consequences, because people are normally gonna believe this. This is a real thing that happens. I didn't really enjoy that dynamic. And then the extra storyline in which Kelly is being sued by one of her late husband's cousins for the house. It was unnecessary. There was a little bit, maybe a couple paragraphs over here, she quickly goes to the lawyer, and then we don't even think about it until the end of the story, in which the lawyer says, hey, everything's good, it's all yours. The cousin shows up at the house for like 2 paragraphs, and she's like, well, it's mine, so go away and never come back. What was that for? What was the point of that? There was literally no reason for that. It didn't move the story along in any ways. If it was a red herring, it didn't work very well. I don't understand why it was there. It was pointless. And there are a few other things that I started to take issue with the story, especially with how readily Rob the cop, the investigator, allowed Kelly to steamroll him into this investigation and how willing he was to just cough up all of this information to her. I can't believe that they would let her go around the crime scene. Even if she was using a towel to get into things, that towel would have smudged evidence. There was literally no way you couldn't have contaminated that unless you knew what you were doing. And she is just some Joe Schmo off the street. She's not going to know all of those protocols, and a towel isn't going to do what you think it's going to do. So that irked me, and then she kept on pushing her way into various different places that it didn't feel like she belonged. Even at the hospital, she kind of steamrolled over nurses and doctors and everything else, and maybe that's her personality. I don't believe it, and I didn't like it at all. So I kind of went off on a tangent there, and I know it really sounds like I'm ragging on this book. It did have some pretty good bones with the whole kidnapping storyline and all of that. I just don't think it was executed to the best of its potential, and that was my biggest issue. So tell me down below, of course, if you have read this story and what your thoughts are. I would love to have a conversation with you about it. And as always, if you'd like to stay up to date with every time I upload, subscribe down below, and I heart your beautiful faces. Bye.